Okay, and sat with Robert Jackson, who's doing a PhD at Lancaster University, but has written a book about Bioshock, which you'll perhaps give me the full title of in a minute. But you've written about philosophy and video games in general. Are video games a proper subject matter for philosophers?
Yes, they are. I mean, there's two sides to that, really. One is that you have this idea of philosophers who are, in a sense, interested in popular culture for giving us that popular culture give us more allegorize our lives far more substantially than, say, works of philosophy, or literary works of philosophy, or classical literary works. So the principal sort of linchpin of this view is probably someone like Slavoj Žižek.
Yeah, who wants to write not about kind of Hegel these days, but wants about Kung Fu Panda.
Or how Kung Fu Panda tells us something about Hegel in a weird sort of U-turn Hegelian way. But certainly, someone like, for example, Žižek is very bad at writing about video games because he kind of views them as cinema. It's just one of those things of, Žižek will say something like, isn't it really this fantasy of killing everyone?
So for him, everything is cinema.
Everything's cinema, yeah, exactly. But what's interesting about games as a medium is they're not, it's a clearly different medium than cinema. It's to do with computational systems. It's to do with how systems, a different way of using systems as a modelling simulation. That's basically almost how all games work. Is this notion of they model a certain system, whether it's abstract or concrete, and the predominant view is this idea that the player playing that system is in a sense playing a certain view, or that the system structures a certain number of arguments that are used in procedures, as it's a procedural system, to kind of deliver a sort of view during play. So that's one side that philosophers have kind of converged on with games, this idea that the games kind of combine a sort of ethics on how we should do it. And certainly Bioshock is viewed in that way.
So a lot of philosophers want to treat video games the way they treat kind of popular culture generally, as telling them stuff that they can get on with in terms of ethics. And there's another way that philosophers engage with them?
Well, the other way of engaging them is to look at them as material systems.
Right.
And whether that's involved looking at them, I call this sort of the Latourian way, in a way, because it's getting down to the specifics of how systems work. Getting them down to understanding how the systems sort of structure gameplay, how gameplay is structured, and what sort of arguments come through there, the history of how games are produced, the industries that come through them. I call it the general ecology for how games are made. So this is multifaceted, open-ended way of looking at games as systems, rather than just a sort of blank fantasy that Žižek might.
We're going to screen to project onto our values, our culture.
Exactly. And those are really the two dominant things. And I think the latter way, the Latourian way, is a much more specific way. So there's a guy called Darius, I forget his name, I think it's Kazemi, who's just published a book on a game that no one knows what's. I mean, I've never played it. But he goes through this Latourian way. He goes through how the very specifics of how certain events led up to the game being made, and then the very code and the very material, procedures that go into how the game was produced, how the game was made, that give a kind of broad ecological understanding of that game.
And the form model that you talked about you don't even need to know how games are made. You don't need to know how the code works. All you're interested in is the product.
Yes, in a sense, yeah. I mean,
that second one is much more fine-grained in the production.
Exactly, yeah. But the interesting thing about that is a lot of code that AAA games are made are proprietary. So it's very difficult to, it's deliberately made to design not to be cracked open.
You can't reverse engineer it.
Yeah. I mean, this game that Darius looked at was called, I think, Jagged Alliance 3, I think it's called. And that's very easy because that's an old game.
Yeah.
And other people have done this with, say, Half-Life. They've done presentations on how the designers had to overcome challenges and all of these contingent things that came towards making a game that no one would necessarily think of when they're playing it. They're just playing it as an experience or playing it as a certain thing, rather than an artifact to be looked at.
Yeah, so their philosophical investigation there is much more below the surface, and much more about kind of things that the end viewer would not really, or the end consumer or player would really struggle to get to be care about, even though mine would know about.
And that's when there's a phenomenal it's very popular in the 70s is apparatus theory in cinema, which deals with this explicitly. Is that all the technical apparatuses that are used in cinema are kind of forgotten away once you're sitting in the cinema room. Just give
you're in the darkness with
you don't need to worry about the outside world. You're in your cocoon, like the Plato's cave. Another allegory, and all the techniques and things that go into producing that, all the material techniques that go into producing that experience, deliberately meant to be unacknowledged.
So it sounds like there are kind of different approaches. In terms of kind of doing that, what comes from that in terms of the analysis? What kind of output? So I can see the Zizek'ian model, the first model, gives you kind of generalisms and cultural kind of view of the society's going this way, we make kind of ethical judgment of people. What are the levels of kind of conclusion in the second model equally fine-grained as the analysis itself, or are they kind of generalise out kind of more cultural or ethical?
Well, I think it's more grounded in it's more of a grounded analysis into the sort of the actors that came into the ecology that brought along this product at a particular time. Whereas the Zizek'ian one is much more strained into what does this say about society.
Yeah.
I mean, the general procedure with Zizek is, look at a popular artifact of culture, coffee cup, phone.
Yeah, Kinder Egg.
Look at it and go, well, isn't this is an allegory of the Lacanian Hegelian subject? Agree, because that's all he does.
Yeah,
and then repeat
more times. Tell you
and then just carry on, and then put it in other books. Which I love Zizek. I think he's
absolutely.
He's great.
But there's a lot of repetition, shouting, and sweat.
He's a sweaty pop nihilist.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
Stalinist. He's not really nihilist.
Yeah, no. Whereas the other model, therefore, has the kind of its conclusions that it reaches are much more linked to its method and that kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. It's much more tied to identifying the truth of something.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of where the book pivots, is this idea of looking at Bioshock. Other people have looked at Bioshock as something which allegorizes a certain truth that the player then plays, interprets that truth, and then
goes into the world,
and then goes into the world and happy as Larry. My book is kind of to distance itself away from that, and to not look at Bioshock as an allegorizing thing, but to look at it more as a propagative system that actually exists in the world and actually has values in it. Not that both viewpoints talk about values.
Yeah.
One side is that the Bioshock has an allegory of values that you interpret, and the other side is the idea of it as a system that propagates values, which I associate with propaganda generally.
That's really interesting. I think it shows us also that video games, whatever approach we take, and there are probably more approaches to come, because there's such a massive cultural phenomenon and the kind of generations that are kind of emerging who are kind of drenched in them, are probably exactly the kind of thing that philosophers should be looking at.
I think it will do. I think it will do generally because, I'm 31. I've grown up with video games all my life. I know people who are younger than me, and that's all they've grown up with. I think it's just going to be one of those things where a generation dies off, that people aren't interested in video games.
About it and think, what's they
to be vulgar, it's one generation dies off and another generation has grown up with something that they
absolutely.
consider has significant value.
So that question that might occur to me, is this a serious subject for philosophers? Wouldn't even occur to them. How could it not be?
How could it not be? Exactly. Same with cinema. In the same way there was a generation of people who didn't take cinema seriously.
Yeah, and now we don't at all.
Yeah, it's anachronistic, I know, but that's generally how I see it. Yeah.
Thank you.